At just 6 years old, a little girl was forced into marriage with a man 23 years older, a king nearly 5 times her age. Childhood ended the day she became his bride. Today we'll uncover the disturbing truth behind this royal marriage, the politics that demanded it, the customs that excused it, and the hidden cost paid by a child trapped in a crown she never asked for. By the end, you'll see why this story isn't as far from our modern world as you think. Imagine this: your daughter, niece or sister, still learning her letters, suddenly dressed in silk, handed to a man almost 30. Would you call it destiny or a crime? Drop your answer in the comments, because history shows entire kingdoms once celebrated it. Who was this 6-year-old girl, and why was her life rewritten so cruelly? Born into royalty, she should have lived among toys and tutors, not crowns and contracts. But her birthright was less about childhood and more about strategy. To her family, she wasn't just a daughter, she was a bargaining chip in the grand chessboard of power. Her tender age made her easy to mould, but impossible to protect. While other children learned rhymes and games, she was rehearsing vows written by men twice her father's age. One girl, one crown, one stolen childhood. That's not destiny, it's manipulation. And it set the stage for one of history's most unsettling unions. Power turned her innocence into currency. On the other side stood a man of nearly 30, already hardened by politics and ambition. For him, marriage to a child wasn't about love or even companionship. It was about control. He gained a wife, but more importantly, he gained legitimacy, land, and leverage over rival factions. Imagine being a grown man celebrated for wedding a child. The applause of courtiers drowned out the silence of conscience. He saw her not as a partner, but as proof of his dominance. To him, she was a crown on legs far too small to carry its weight. This wasn't romance, it was calculation. 2 lives, 2 timelines smashed into one nightmare contract. For him, it was power. For her, it was prison. Why would anyone endorse such a grotesque union? Because in royal courts, children weren't children. They were pawns. A 6-year-old bride could seal alliances faster than treaties and bind families more tightly than armies. Monarchs didn't think in birthdays or bedtimes. They thought in dynasties and empires. This little girl's hand in marriage was less about love than about lines on a map. The bride became the rope in a tug-of-war between rival kingdoms, her childhood exchanged for borders and banners, and while her laughter vanished, the applause of nobles thundered. For them, it was a victory. For her, a lifetime stolen. You might wonder, how did society stomach it? The answer is chilling. They normalized it. In that world, marriage was less about age and more about advantage. If it produced heirs and preserved power, morality bowed to tradition. Advisors whispered, priests blessed, and courtiers smiled as the child walked to her fate. To them, she was fulfilling a sacred duty. But behind the gold and incense lay the undeniable truth. Childhood had been sacrificed at the altar of ambition. What shocks us today was once celebrated with feasts and fireworks. At 6 years old, a child should be chasing butterflies, not crowns. Yet her days were no longer her own. Dolls were replaced with jewels, bedtime stories with political briefings. Every smile became a performance, every step a duty rehearsed under watchful eyes. The innocence of childhood, mud pies, songs, scribbled drawings, was gone in a single ceremony. Psychologists today would call it trauma, but back then it was called destiny. The saddest part? She likely believed it was normal because no one told her otherwise. Why did families force children into these marriages? Follow the money. A union like this wasn't just about politics, it was about wealth. Dowries worth fortunes, lands exchanged, debts forgiven. To her family, her marriage wasn't a tragedy, but an investment. She was less a daughter than a deposit slip, securing fortunes across borders. Meanwhile, merchants, lords, and even peasants celebrated, believing their future was secured under the shadow of the royal bed. But while the kingdom grew rich, the girl paid the bill with her freedom. When morality falters, people often turn to faith for validation, and in this case, priests and preachers stood ready with blessings. They cited scripture, invoked divine will, and cloaked the marriage in sacred language. To question it was to question God. In temples and cathedrals, sermons praised obedience over innocence. The child bride was paraded not only as a queen, but as a chosen vessel of holiness. Yet beneath the incense and chants lay a darker reality. Religion had been bent to serve power. What should have been a shield for the weak became a sword for the strong. While other children scribbled lessons on slate, she was learning the rituals of queenship. Arithmetic was replaced with etiquette, playtime with diplomacy. Tutors taught her how to curtsy, not how to dream. Her innocence wasn't stolen in one night. It was chipped away daily, replaced by duties beyond her years. Imagine a 6-year-old tasked with memorizing the names of foreign dignitaries instead of nursery rhymes. That's not childhood, it's captivity dressed in velvet. By shaping her early, the court ensured loyalty, obedience, and silence. But silence has a cost. The child within her was buried alive. The wedding itself was both dazzling and disturbing. Imagine a hall glittering with jewels, filled with nobles applauding, while at the centre stood a 6-year-old bride. Her gown, heavy with embroidery, may have dragged along the floor she could barely walk across. The groom, nearly 30, towered beside her like a father instead of a partner. Priests recited blessings, guests cheered, and the kingdom celebrated what they called unity. Yet behind the splendour hid a grotesque truth. It was a contract signed in innocence and sealed in silence. To the crowd it was tradition, to the child it was confusion. And when the vows were spoken, history applauded the prison it had built. Who truly gained from this marriage? Not the child, certainly. The king gained legitimacy and control over rival lands. Her family gained wealth, protection, and prestige. Courtiers secured their influence. Everyone won, except the girl at the centre. She was a prize, not a partner. Her body became a border treaty, her crown a symbol of her family's submission. It was politics disguised as matrimony, power wrapped in lace. The tragedy is clear. The entire empire profited from her sacrifice. And though history praises kings, it often forgets the children crushed beneath their crowns. If this story shocks you, it should. And there are more like it, hidden in royal archives across the world. Make sure you're subscribed because the second half of this video uncovers even darker truths, including child marriages that shaped entire nations. Hit the bell so you don't miss the next revelation. This marriage wasn't an isolated horror. History is littered with similar stories. In medieval Europe, noble girls as young as 7 were promised to men 3 times their age. In Mughal India, alliances were sealed with children whose lives were barely beginning. Even in Renaissance courts, daughters of dukes and kings were sent into unions before they could even read. These marriages were praised as strategic genius, cementing dynasties for centuries. But behind every alliance was a child, silenced and forgotten. The pattern is global and it is staggering. Children treated as pawns, their futures erased before they began. In public, child marriages were celebrated with feasts, music, and royal decrees. Nobles toasted the blessed union, artists painted scenes of harmony, and poets spun verses of destiny fulfilled. But, privately, the reality was darker. Children wept in silence, stripped of family, comfort, and safety. Some barely understood what had happened to them until years later. This stark duality, public triumph, private tragedy, was the hallmark of such unions. A 6-year-old bride may have smiled in portraits, but her diary, if she had one, would have told another story. What looked like triumph on the outside was torment within. Not every child marriage went unchallenged. In some courts, whispers grew into scandals. Advisors questioned the wisdom, rivals mocked the practice, and occasionally mothers resisted. There are records of queens secretly protesting, trying to shield their daughters from being handed over like cattle. In rare cases, outrage spilled into the streets, subjects horrified that their ruler could wed a child. But power usually drowned out protest. Monarchs silenced critics with gifts, punishments, or exile. What we see here is the ancient version of a public relations cover-up. Spin the scandal, erase the outrage, rewrite the narrative. Still, each whisper of dissent mattered, planting the seeds of future resistance. History remembers kings, not children, yet scattered accounts reveal heartbreaking glimpses of child brides who fought back. Some refused to attend their wedding ceremonies, clinging to toys or mothers' skirts. Others ran away, only to be dragged back under guard. A few documented cases even show young brides rebelling years later, defying their husbands, seeking annulments, or escaping to convents. Their voices are faint, buried in chronicles written by men who preferred silence. But those fragments remind us that not every child accepted her fate quietly. Resistance may not have toppled kingdoms, but it proved that innocence could still resist tyranny. The tragedy of child marriage didn't end at the altar. For many, it began there. Girls forced into motherhood at ages their bodies weren't ready for faced health crises, difficult pregnancies, early deaths, and lifelong injuries. Historical records describe queens who never bore heirs because their young bodies were permanently damaged. Infertility became a curse blamed on the bride rather than the system that broke her. Even those who survived childbirth were often worn down before adulthood, their bodies aged before their time. What should have been decades of life turned into a handful of strained years. The human cost of these unions wasn't just innocence lost, it was lives shortened. Beyond physical scars came the invisible wounds. Imagine being forced to live as a wife before you even understood what marriage meant. Many child brides grew up in fear of their husbands, fear of failing dynastic duties, fear of speaking out. Some became eerily obedient, their childhood curiosity crushed. Others developed depression or dissociation, retreating into silence. Historical accounts rarely mention emotions, but read between the lines. The forced obedience, the meek behaviour praised by courtiers, these were symptoms of trauma. And while kings gained power, the girls lost their sense of self. Childhood should build identity, but here it erased it. It's easy to dismiss these stories as ancient relics, but child marriage is not confined to the past. Today, across the globe, an estimated 12 million girls are still married before the age of 18 every year. In some regions, the average age is shockingly close to the medieval standard, 13, 12, even younger. Poverty, tradition, and politics still drive families to trade children for survival or status. What kings once called dynasty, families now call security. Yet the result is unchanged: stolen youth, broken futures, and silence where laughter should be. The world may condemn it, but the numbers remain stubborn. Laws exist. International treaties ban child marriage. Many nations criminalize it, yet loopholes remain, often in the form of parental consent or religious exceptions. On paper, progress looks undeniable. In reality, enforcement is weak, and cultural pressures remain stronger than statutes. The lesson history offers, power protecting itself at the expense of innocence, still echoes. Tsios. Kings once justified their unions with crowns. Modern families justify theirs with survival. The excuses change, the outcome doesn't. Until societies value childhood over tradition, the cycle repeats. History remembers kings for victories, treaties, and thrones, not for the children they consumed along the way. The 29-year-old groom in this story was praised as a strategist, a consolidator of power, a ruler who secured his dynasty. His marriage to a child became a footnote, excused as custom of the times. Chronicles speak of his reign in glowing terms, but rarely of the girl whose life was sacrificed for his ambition. To his people, he was a builder of stability. To her, he was the man who stole her childhood. But what of the bride herself? Here the records fall silent, because children's voices were rarely preserved. No diary survives, no letter in her hand. We can only imagine her confusion. Dressed in silk too heavy to walk in, spoken to in words too formal to understand. Did she cry that night? Did she cling to her mother's side? Or did she numb herself, believing obedience was survival? The tragedy is not just that her story was lived, it's that her story was silenced. Stories like this one aren't just grim curiosities, they're warnings. They remind us how easily innocence can be sacrificed when power, wealth, or tradition take priority. The 6-year-old child bride was not unique. She was part of a global pattern that stretched across cultures and centuries, and even now, millions of children remain at risk for the same reasons: poverty, ambition, fear, and custom. Here's a dual fact to end with. In medieval courts, children as young as 6 were forced into marriage, and today, despite laws and treaties, 1 in 5 women worldwide was married before age 18. Different centuries, same outcome. The tragedy is timeless, but so is the opportunity to resist it. When we see the statistics, we are reminded that history is not just the past, it's the present in disguise. The crown, the contract, the applause, these may have changed shape, but the pattern remains. History's cruelty is often hidden beneath gold and glory. The marriage of a 6-year-old to a 29-year-old king was celebrated as destiny, but it was really theft of youth, of innocence, of humanity. By remembering these stories, we sharpen our awareness of exploitation, past and present. And if you found this disturbing, wait until you hear the story of another royal marriage that ended in betrayal and bloodshed. That video is coming next.